Emily Thompson's husband was killed in a hit-and-run while jogging, a tragedy that shattered her world. Just 4 weeks later, still grieving, she stunned everyone by marrying her ex-boyfriend Jason Matthews, an ex-con with a troubled past. Richard Thompson was an ordinary man, living an ordinary life in a quiet neighborhood where everybody knew each other by name. His life followed a routine, a steady job, a loving wife, and a simple daily ritual that gave him peace in the middle of a busy world. Every morning just before sunrise, Richard put on his running shoes and headed out for a jog. It was his way to clear his mind, to breathe fresh air, and to prepare himself for the day ahead. No one thought anything unusual about it. It was something Richard did every single day without fail. That morning, the air was cool and still. Birds chirped softly as Richard stepped out the front door, wearing his favorite gray sweatshirt and black running shorts. He waved goodbye to Emily, his wife, who was busy making coffee in the kitchen. Emily watched him from the window, smiling faintly as he jogged down the street. Their life wasn't perfect, but it was comfortable and peaceful. At least, that's what everyone believed. Minutes passed, then an hour. Richard had not returned. Emily's smile faded, replaced by a growing sense of worry. It wasn't like Richard to be late, especially for something he did every day. She stepped outside, calling his name softly, hoping he was just taking a longer route or stopped to talk to a neighbor. But no reply came. Her heart began to pound. She grabbed her phone and called his cell, but it went straight to voicemail. Neighbors began to notice Emily standing alone in the front yard, glancing down the road as if waiting for someone who wasn't coming. A few people stepped outside, concerned. It was unusual for Richard not to be back by now. One neighbor suggested calling the police. Emily hesitated, but finally dialed the emergency number, her voice shaking as she reported her husband missing. The police arrived quickly and started to search the area. It was a quiet morning, with only a few cars passing by. The officers split up, walking along the jogging paths and side streets. Then, just as the sun was climbing higher, a call came from a patrol car parked a few miles away. A man's body had been found on the side of a less-traveled road, partially hidden by bushes. The description matched Richard. Emily's world turned upside down. When she arrived at the scene, she saw the covered form lying lifeless. The police explained it was a hit-and-run. Someone had struck Richard while he was jogging and then sped away without stopping. No one saw the driver or the car. No one had called for help. The silence around the scene was deafening. Questions flooded Emily's mind. Who would do such a thing? Why? The police promised to investigate, but in that moment there were no answers. Richard's death was a sudden, violent break in a life that had seemed so normal, so safe. The community was shaken too. The neighborhood had always been peaceful, a place where children played outside and people trusted each other. Now there was fear. Fear that someone dangerous was driving freely, leaving destruction behind. People began locking their doors more tightly and looking over their shoulders during evening walks. Emily was left to face the unbearable alone. At home, the empty silence in the rooms Richard once filled with laughter and conversation felt crushing. She found herself staring at his running shoes by the door, remembering the mornings when he would tie them tightly and jog away without a second thought. Now, those shoes sat unused, a painful reminder of what had been lost. Despite the grief, Emily knew she had to keep moving. Friends and family surrounded her, offering support, but nothing could fill the emptiness. Each day brought a new wave of sadness and unanswered questions. The police continued their investigation, but with no witnesses or leads, progress was slow. The idea that the hit and run could have been an accident was hard to accept, but it was all Emily had. As days turned into weeks, the search for the driver continued. Flyers were posted around town, and social media buzzed with posts asking for information. Some people claimed to have seen suspicious cars speeding in the area that morning, but nothing concrete ever came of the tips. The case grew colder, and with it, the hope that justice would be served grew dimmer. Emily struggled with the public attention. Her pain was no longer private, but shared with the entire town and strangers online. She avoided the media, unwilling to answer questions that only reopened wounds. Instead, she focused on the small rituals that kept her connected to Richard's memory. Lighting a candle by the window, keeping his favorite chair at the dinner table, and visiting the place where his body was found, laying flowers by the roadside. What no one understood was that Richard's death was not just a tragic accident to Emily. It was the beginning of a dark chapter filled with secrets that would soon come to light. The man she thought she knew, the life they built together, were about to unravel in ways no one expected. For now, though, the neighborhood held its breath, waiting for answers that seemed just out of reach. And somewhere in the shadows, the truth waited too, hidden beneath layers of grief, fear, and silence. After Richard's sudden death, the entire community felt a deep sense of loss and unease. The town had always been peaceful, a place where people left their doors unlocked and children played freely in the streets. But now the quiet streets seemed to hum with tension. No one knew who was responsible for the hit and run, and the fact that the driver had vanished without a trace made everyone nervous. Who was out there, driving recklessly? Could it happen again? The fear was real and palpable, spreading quietly from neighbor to neighbor. Emily Thompson's world had shrunk to the size of her grief. She moved through her days like a shadow, going through the motions but feeling nothing inside. At first, the steady flow of visitors, friends, family, neighbors, offered some comfort. They brought casseroles, sat with her in silence, and cried with her. But as the days turned into weeks, those visits slowed, and Emily was left alone again with her sorrow. The emptiness of the house became unbearable. Richard's chair at the kitchen table sat unused, his clothes hung untouched in the closet, and his toothbrush remained on the bathroom sink. It was as if time had stopped the moment he died. Despite her grief, Emily knew she had to start rebuilding something, anything. Life around her was moving forward, even though hers felt stuck in place. Then, just when no one expected it, Emily made a choice that stunned the entire town. 4 weeks after Richard's death, she was seen in public not as a widow, but walking, hand in hand with Jason Miller, her ex-boyfriend. Jason Miller was a figure everyone in town knew, but few truly trusted. His past was complicated, marked by mistakes and trouble with the law. Years ago, Jason had been convicted of robbery and served time in prison. After his release, he tried to make a fresh start, but the shadows of his past clung tightly. Some people believed in second chances. Others whispered behind his back, doubting he could ever change. His relationship with Emily, before Richard, had ended badly. Police reports showed there had been at least one serious argument between them, involving threats and accusations. It was not a relationship remembered fondly by many. When Emily was seen with Jason again, Questions swirled like a storm. How could she move on so quickly? Why would she choose someone with such a troubled past, especially after losing her husband so suddenly? The community was divided. Some were sympathetic. Understanding grief could push people to unexpected places. Others were judgmental, convinced that Jason's return meant something darker was happening. News spread fast. Reporters came knocking, asking questions Emily didn't want to answer. The local paper published stories speculating on the strange new chapter of her life. Friends who had once supported her began to distance themselves, uncomfortable with the sudden change. But Emily stayed quiet. She never explained her reasons publicly. To her, the world was too noisy and full of judgment to share the complicated truth. Behind closed doors, Emily's life was far from simple. Richard's death had uncovered secrets she had buried deep. Their marriage, which everyone thought was happy, had been marked by tension and fear. Richard, she realized, was not the man the town believed him to be. Behind the calm exterior was a man who had sometimes been cruel, controlling, and abusive. Emily had hidden this truth from everyone, afraid no one would believe her, or that it would make her grief even harder to bear. The few scars she carried were invisible to the outside world, but they shaped her decisions in ways no one could see. Jason, despite his flaws, was the only person who truly knew the darker parts of Emily's past. Their previous relationship had been stormy, yes, but it was also a connection built on shared struggles and survival. In the days after Richard's death, Jason had quietly reached out, offering support without asking questions. When Emily felt alone and scared, Jason was there. Slowly, their old bond reignited, not as a rekindling of romance, but as a desperate need for safety and understanding. The community, meanwhile, remained restless. The police investigation into the hit-and-run stalled. No new evidence surfaced, and the driver's identity stayed a mystery. Some neighbors took matters into their own hands, organizing neighborhood watches and sharing suspicious sightings on social media. Fear of the unknown loomed larger than ever. Rumors began to spread, whispers that Emily and Jason's reunion was not a coincidence but part of a deeper story. Some believed Jason was involved in Richard's death, that his criminal past made him dangerous enough to harm the man who had married the woman he once loved. Others thought Emily might be hiding secrets herself, possibly knowing more about what happened that day than she admitted. Gossip became a weapon, dividing friends and families. Yet, amid the whispers and suspicion, a strange calm settled over Emily. In the company of Jason, she found a fragile sense of peace. He was flawed, but he understood her pain without judgment. For the first time since Richard died, she felt less like a victim and more like a person trying to survive. They married quietly, with few witnesses, 4 weeks after Richard's funeral. The news shocked the town. Many people couldn't comprehend such a quick decision. Was it too soon? Was it real? The questions echoed everywhere. But to Emily, the marriage was not about rushing love. It was about reclaiming control over a life that had spiraled into chaos. It was a shield against loneliness and fear, a way to protect herself from the unknown dangers still lurking in the shadows. What the town didn't see was how complicated Emily's emotions were. The lines between love, fear, and survival blurred. Jason was both a reminder of a painful past and a lifeline to a safer future. She wasn't naive. She knew Jason's faults and had doubts of her own. But after everything she had lost, she was determined not to be a victim again. The hit-and-run case, meanwhile, continued to haunt the community. Without new leads, the police faced growing pressure. The driver remained free, a ghost behind the wheel. The mystery deepened, and the fear grew. What had happened to Richard? Was it truly an accident? Or was there something more hidden beneath the surface? Slowly, the story of Emily, Jason, and Richard began to unfold beyond the surface tragedy. Secrets buried in the past, fears hidden in the present, and the desperate search for truth created a tangled web. The quiet town was no longer so quiet. The shadows that had waited silently were beginning to stir, promising that the real story was far from over. Emily's sudden marriage to Jason stunned everyone, but behind closed doors the reality was far more complicated than the town could imagine. While the public saw only a quick union between a grieving widow and her troubled ex, Emily carried a secret burden no one knew about. Richard Thompson, the man the community had mourned as a loving husband and father, had a darker side. A side Emily had hidden from everyone, including her closest friends. In the early days of their marriage, Emily's private world started to unravel. She had endured years of subtle cruelty, controlling behavior, and moments of violence from Richard. There had been times when she felt trapped, fearful for her safety, but too ashamed or scared to speak out. Friends who had only seen Richard's smiling face at neighborhood gatherings would have been shocked to know about the nights Emily spent hiding in closets, or the bruises she covered with long sleeves. But Emily never told anyone. She carried her pain silently, convincing herself that things might get better, or that she was simply unlucky. The death of Richard was a sudden release from that nightmare, but also the start of new fears. Without him, Emily felt exposed and vulnerable. Jason's return was a lifeline, not because he was perfect, but because he was someone who understood her pain and didn't judge her for it. Jason himself was a complicated figure. After years behind bars, he had struggled to piece his life back together. His criminal record and past mistakes made it hard for him to find steady work or trust from the community. The town's suspicion of him was palpable. People whispered about his temper and past violence, drawing a clear line between good and bad in their minds. But Emily saw a man who had changed, at least in some ways, and who was willing to stand by her when she needed someone most. As the days passed, Emily and Jason's relationship deepened quietly, but their new life was far from peaceful. The community's eyes were on them, watching every move with suspicion and judgment. Friends who once offered sympathy now kept their distance. Conversations stopped abruptly when Emily entered the room. The gossip was brutal and relentless. Many wondered if Jason's presence was connected to Richard's death, fueling rumors that he might have had a hand in the tragedy. The police investigation, too, was taking a new turn. Detectives reopened Richard's case with fresh eyes. New witnesses came forward, people who had seen Richard arguing with someone days before his death. The argument was heated, tense, and public enough that several neighbors noticed. When they described the man Richard had argued with, their descriptions bore an unsettling resemblance to Jason. This new information sent ripples through the town. The police questioned Jason extensively, trying to piece together his whereabouts. On the day Richard died, Jason insisted he was nowhere near the accident scene, but his answers were vague. The inconsistencies raised suspicions. Meanwhile, forensic experts analyzed evidence from the crash site and found traces of a rare chemical on the car that struck Richard, a chemical linked to a local factory where Jason had worked before his imprisonment. Suddenly, what seemed like a simple hit-and-run was turning into a tangled web of secrets, lies, and possible revenge. Why had Richard and Jason argued? What was the connection to the factory? Were the old wounds between them more dangerous than anyone realized? As pressure mounted, Emily found herself caught in the middle. She struggled with guilt and fear. The town's judgment weighed heavily on her, but the greatest fear was the truth coming out. If people knew about the abuse, the hidden scars, the pain she had suffered, would they understand? Or would they condemn her for marrying Jason so soon? After Richard's death? Despite everything, Emily and Jason's marriage was more than a desperate act. It was a shield. Emily believed that with Jason by her side, she could protect herself from the threats she felt still lurking in the shadows. Yet, even as they tried to build a new life, old wounds threatened to reopen. Arguments erupted between them, fueled by the stress and fear of what might be uncovered. Jason's temper flared at times, reminding Emily that he was far from perfect. But there were moments of tenderness too. Moments when the two found comfort in each other's presence, sharing, silent understanding born from pain and survival. In those quiet spaces, Emily allowed herself to hope, for safety, for freedom, for a future beyond grief. Meanwhile, the town grew restless. More people came forward with stories about Richard that contradicted the picture of the perfect husband. Neighbors talked about late-night arguments they overheard, sudden disappearances, and the way Emily sometimes looked scared when Richard was around. The image of Richard as a beloved man began to crack, revealing the darker truth underneath. The police also uncovered troubling details about Jason's time before prison. His work at the factory involved handling hazardous materials, and his past was tied to dangerous environments and risky behavior. The rare chemical found on the vehicle that hit Richard suggested that someone familiar with that world was involved. Was it Jason or someone else connected to his past? The questions piled up without answers. Then came an unexpected discovery. An old letter from Richard to Emily surfaced, a letter she had hidden in a drawer and forgotten. The words were chilling. Richard wrote about jealousy, anger, and threats against Jason. He claimed he would do whatever it took to keep Emily away from her ex, revealing a dangerous obsession that no one had known about. This letter changed everything. It showed that Richard's death might not have been a random accident at all. It raised the possibility that someone had planned the hit and run to silence Richard or protect Emily. The police reopened old leads, focusing on the idea that Richard's death was connected to a deeper story of anger and betrayal. Emily, torn between fear and hope, realized that the past she had buried was catching up with her. The quiet life she wanted was slipping away, replaced by a battle for truth and survival. Jason's past and Richard's secrets were tangled together, creating a dangerous storm with no clear end. As the investigation deepened, Emily's own role became a focus. Some questioned whether she had known more than she said, or if her marriage to Jason was part of a plan to hide the truth. The pressure was immense. She felt trapped between the love she once had for Richard and the protection Jason offered. Her decisions would shape the future, but the choices were never easy. The story of Emily, Jason, and Richard was no longer a simple tragedy. It was a dark, twisted tale of secrets, lies, and survival. The town watched, waiting to see what would come next, as the hidden truths began to surface. Truths that would change everything and shock the community to its core. The town was no longer a place of quiet whispers. It had become a stage for suspicion and fear. Emily's marriage to Jason, the resurfacing secrets about Richard, and the slow unraveling of the hit-and-run case had everyone watching, waiting for the next shocking revelation. The police investigation was intensifying, and the atmosphere grew heavier with every new discovery. Detective Mark Evans, the lead investigator on Richard's case, was a man known for his patience and careful attention to detail. He believed the hit-and-run was not an accident, but a carefully planned crime. Every new piece of evidence seemed to support his theory. The chemical traces found on the vehicle, the argument witnessed between Richard and someone resembling Jason, and the threatening letter Richard had written, all pointed to a deep, dangerous conflict. Detective Evans was convinced that the truth was hidden just beneath the surface, but it would take time and skill to find it. One of the biggest breakthroughs came when surveillance footage from a nearby gas station was discovered. The footage showed a dark-colored car speeding away from the scene shortly after the time Richard was hit. The car's make and model matched one that Jason had once owned before his imprisonment. Although the car had been sold months earlier, the possibility that Jason, or someone connected to him, was involved couldn't be ignored. Jason was called in for another round of questioning. This time, the detectives pressed him hard about the car, his whereabouts on the day of the accident, and his relationship with Richard. Jason remained calm but evasive. He claimed he was working at a local diner, but the manager couldn't confirm his story. The inconsistencies made the police suspicious. Emily watched the investigation with a mix of fear and frustration. She believed Jason was innocent of harming Richard, but she also knew the truth was complicated. Her decision to remarry Jason so quickly had drawn a spotlight on both of them, and now their pasts were being pulled into the light, no matter how much they wanted to keep them hidden. Amid the tension, Emily discovered something else, something that shook her to the core. While going through Richard's belongings, she found a small notebook filled with cryptic notes and phone numbers. It appeared Richard had been involved in something dangerous, something that went beyond their personal conflicts. The notebook hinted at secret meetings, threats from unknown people, and plans to confront someone. Emily couldn't understand what Richard had been tangled in, but the danger was clear. The discovery raised new questions. Was Richard's death connected to this secret life? Had someone wanted to silence him before he could expose the truth? And if so, who else was involved? Emily shared the notebook with Detective Evans, who immediately saw its importance. The case was no longer just about a hit and run or a personal feud. It was now linked to something bigger. The phone numbers led to a series of calls made to people known for their criminal activities, drug dealers, loan sharks, and people with violent reputations. The investigation expanded to include these new suspects, but every lead seemed to twist and turn without a clear path. The complexity of the case made it difficult to separate truth from deception. Some people lied, others refused to talk, and the shadows of fear and loyalty held the town in a tight grip. Meanwhile, Emily's relationship with Jason grew more strained. The stress of the investigation, the community's judgment, and the constant fear of what might be uncovered weighed heavily on them. Arguments became more frequent, often sparked by small frustrations, but fueled by the bigger pressures surrounding them. Jason struggled with his past, catching up to him. The police suspicion and public gossip reminded him of the prison walls he had once left behind. He wanted to prove he was a changed man, but every step forward seemed to push him back into darkness. Emily, too, was torn between loyalty to the man she married and fear of the secrets he might still hold. The nights were the hardest. Emily lay awake, haunted by memories of Richard and the man she had once loved, now revealed as someone darker than she ever imagined. She wondered if she had made a mistake marrying Jason so soon, or if the past had left her no other choice. Then came a shocking twist. A neighbor who had kept quiet until now came forward with a startling piece of information. On the morning Richard was killed, they had seen a stranger watching Emily's house. The stranger was described as tall, wearing a dark hoodie and sunglasses, despite the early hour. The person's behavior was odd, nervous, and secretive. This stranger was not seen anywhere else in the neighborhood that day. The police began to suspect that the hit and run was part of a larger plan. Perhaps Richard's death was meant to send a message, not just to Emily, but to others involved, in the tangled web of secrets and danger. The mystery deepened as more pieces of the puzzle came together. Emily, despite the fear, found herself stronger than she expected. The support from a few close friends gave her courage, and she began to speak out quietly about the abuse she had suffered. It was a painful step, but it also opened doors to new truths. Other women in the town came forward, sharing their stories of fear and survival. The town's image of safety cracked further, revealing hidden pain and struggles beneath the calm surface. The town was changing. The secrets of Richard's life, Jason's past, and Emily's survival were now part of a larger story, a story of fear, power, and the fight for justice. The police pressed on, chasing shadows and truths, while Emily and Jason faced their own battles in the face of suspicion and fear. Then, the unthinkable happened. One night, Emily received an anonymous letter slipped under her door. It was simple, written in neat, cold handwriting. "You don't know everything. Be careful who you trust." The letter sent a chill down Emily's spine. It was a warning, a threat, and proof that the danger she thought was behind her was very much alive. She didn't know who had sent it or why, but the message was clear. Someone was watching, waiting, and willing to act. Fear gripped her again, but this time it was mixed with determination. Emily knew she had to face the darkness head-on. The past, with all its secrets and pain, was not going to be buried any longer. She would uncover the truth, protect herself and those she loved, and finally bring justice for Richard. As the investigation deepened, and the town's secrets spilled into the open, Emily realized this was only the beginning. The road ahead was dangerous and uncertain, but she was ready to fight for her life, for the truth, and for a future free from fear. The anonymous letter changed everything. Emily knew she was no longer just a grieving widow or a woman trying to start over. She was now a target in a dangerous game, where the stakes were life and death. The warning haunted her every moment, but it also pushed her to confront the truth she had tried to avoid for so long. She realized that if she wanted justice for Richard, and safety for herself, she couldn't run from the shadows any longer. Detective Mark Evans intensified the investigation, knowing time was running out. The stranger seen near Emily's house had to be found, and the mystery behind the threatening letter had to be solved. He assigned extra officers to watch Emily's home, hoping to catch whoever was trying to intimidate her. But the threats didn't stop. Emily received more letters, each more chilling than the last, and signs that someone was watching her every move grew clearer. Then, a shocking discovery changed the course of the case. A local mechanic, who had repaired the dark-colored car, seen speeding away from the hit-and-run, came forward with information. The car had been recently repainted to cover damage consistent with a collision. The mechanic had noticed the owner was nervous, paid in cash, and refused to leave any contact information. This new lead suggested the driver was desperate to hide their identity. The police cross-checked the mechanic's description with their list of suspects and found something unexpected. Jason's name was nowhere near the top. Instead, the owner matched someone else in town, someone no one suspected. It was Brian Matthews, a quiet man who worked at the local factory and had a reputation for keeping to himself. On the surface, Brian seemed harmless, almost invisible. But as the investigation dug deeper, a darker picture emerged. Brian had a secret connection to Richard, a connection fueled by jealousy, anger, and betrayal. It turned out that Brian had been involved in illegal dealings linked to the factory's hazardous chemicals. Richard had discovered Brian's activities and confronted him in an attempt to stop the dangerous behavior. The argument witnesses overheard before Richard's death had been between Richard and Brian, not Jason. Brian's anger had spiraled out of control, leading to the fatal hit-and-run. This revelation shocked the town. Brian's calm, ordinary exterior had hidden a dangerous secret. The police arrested him, and the charges of murder and reckless driving were quickly brought forward. The trial drew intense media attention, shaking the community to its core. For Emily, the truth was both painful and relieving. She had spent weeks doubting Jason, fearing the worst, and struggling with her own fears. Now, the real culprit was in custody, and justice seemed finally within reach. The nightmares began to fade, replaced by a cautious hope for healing. Emily's marriage to Jason also faced a new test. With the truth out, many people began to accept their relationship, seeing Jason in a different light. He had stood by Emily through the darkest times, proving his loyalty and care despite his troubled past. Slowly, the town's judgment softened, but Jason and Emily knew their road was far from easy. The scars left by the past, both theirs and Richard's, would take time to heal. Trust had to be rebuilt, fears faced, and forgiveness granted. The community, too, had to come to terms with the hidden truths that shattered their image of safety. As the trial unfolded, shocking details about Brian's actions came to light. Witnesses testified about the dangerous chemicals he handled, the threats he made, and the secret meetings with other criminals. It became clear that Brian's reckless behavior endangered not only Richard but the entire town. The courtroom was filled with tension as each piece of evidence painted a picture of greed, violence, and betrayal. When the verdict was announced, guilty on all counts, it brought a measure of closure. Brian Matthews was sentenced to life in prison, a punishment that sent a powerful message to the community. Justice had been served, but the wounds remained. Emily found strength in the support of a few close friends who never abandoned her. They helped her rebuild her life, one small step at a time. She and Jason worked hard to create a new future, free from the shadows that had haunted them. Their love was imperfect but real, built on shared pain and hope. The story of Richard's death, Jason's return, and the hidden dangers lurking in the town became a cautionary tale. It revealed how appearances could deceive, how pain could hide beneath smiles, and how courage was needed to face the darkest truths. In the end, Emily stood as a survivor, stronger, wiser, and ready to live again. The hit and run had been a tragedy, but it also sparked a journey toward justice and healing. The secrets that once threatened to destroy her had been exposed, and with them, the chance for a new beginning. The quiet town slowly returned to normal, but the lessons remained. Trust had to be earned, love had to be protected, and no secret was safe forever. For Emily and Jason, the past would never fully disappear, but the future was theirs to shape. And as the sun rose on a new day, Emily finally felt the weight of fear lift from her shoulders. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was hers to walk, free, strong, and unafraid,